Hello, my family of ice and fire. Today we are back with Season 2, Episode 2 of House of the Dragon. If you haven't seen it already, I've already covered Episode 1 of the new season on the channel, so go ahead and check that out if you feel so compelled. Last episode, we had a grieving family, a prophecy, political moves being made, a quest for revenge, and the death of an innocent. This episode will have no spoilers beyond the first 2 episodes of Season 2, as I do a deep dive into the episode, give my thoughts, opinions, and speculation, and make a few references to the books and how the show might have deviated. If you guys enjoy what I have to say, consider dropping a like and subscribe to join my court, and stay tuned for future explanations. Now, let's get into the video. Episode 2 picks up immediately after the events of Episode 1. We see a maid carrying the bloodied sheets of Prince Jaehaerys, and the guards gathering up varying people around the castle. It's a similar event to Episode 9 of Season 1, where the Lords of the Keep are rounded up to ascertain their loyalty, or lack thereof, to King Aegon. One of the themes of this episode is legacy. Aegon's legacy after the death of his son, Rhaenyra's legacy after Daemon killed Jaehaerys, the legacy of the brothers, Adam and Alan of Hull, but we'll get to them later. The symbolism is strong in this episode when it comes to Aegon, as he destroys his late father's model of Old Valyria, something Viserys spent the entirety of his reign to complete. Aegon destroys his father's hard work, the legacy he left behind, and it's a foreboding sign for the House of the Dragon. Valyria was once seen as the pinnacle of society, of Valyrian might, and now it has been destroyed. Outside of the Velaryons and the Celtigars, who are also from Valyria, but no one really acknowledges them, the Targaryens are all that remains of the once mighty people, a symbol of what they once were. So to have a Targaryen tear down the legacy left behind by those who came before, perhaps symbolizes the imminent downfall. The acting of this episode was honestly really good. It was top tier. TGC, the actor for Aegon II, really stood out to me this episode. The way he portrays the grief and unbridled rage of a man who just lost his son in such a brutal way is absolutely phenomenal. Whether you like Aegon as a character or not, this man definitely delivered. And so did Rhys Ifans later in the episode when it came to Otto Hightower. But we'll get into all of that later. Aemond goes back to his room after a night out. Later we'll find out that Aemond was in a brothel with this woman from Season 1, and that's why he wasn't found when Blood and Cheese came looking for him. He finds the coins from his war plans with Criston Cole either moved around or stolen, and this is how he figures out that Blood and Cheese were likely after him. And I can't help but notice some symbolism in this scene when Aemond picks up a coin and places it over his remaining eye. Now, I'm not going to get into detail about what I think this is foreshadowing, but we'll definitely be coming back to this as the series continues. And if you are watching this video with prior knowledge as well from the books, please do not spoil anything for the sake of my show-only viewers, or at least put a spoiler tag in your comments first. Alicent and Otto have a conversation about the events that transpired. Alicent is heartbroken over the death of her grandson and the pain her daughter Helaena had to endure. Otto says that whoever did this, whoever was the cause, would pay for this transgression. But instead of showing anger towards the assassins, towards Rhaenyra and the Blacks, Alicent blames herself instead. She says,
"And what if the hand that's done it is not who must be blamed?"
She says the gods punished them. They punished her specifically. On the one hand, because she was sleeping with Criston Cole. Had he been on duty instead of her, then maybe he could have actually prevented this from happening. On the other hand, this could also be because of what happened in Season 1, which told the council that Viserys wished for Aegon to be king. For years, she pushed her son toward power, the Iron Throne, and now a debt has seemingly come due. Otto says that they'll grieve as they must, but some good can still come from such a tragic situation. It hasn't even been a day since his great-grandson's death, and already Otto is figuring out a way to capitalize on it for their advantage. A small council meeting is called, and Aegon is pissed over the death of his only son. In the books, Aegon and Helaena actually had 3 children. One of them was a 2-year-old boy named Maelor, who doesn't seem to exist yet in House of the Dragon. Aegon says, "My son is my legacy." And once again, it ties back into the beginning of the episode, when Aegon destroys his dad's Lego set. This is the destruction of legacy, especially since Jaehaerys was Aegon's only son, his only heir. Aegon starts pointing the finger at whose fault it is that his son died. He asks where Criston Cole, the commander of his Kingsguard, was during the event, and Criston replies that he was abed, which is true, just not his own and not alone. How would Aegon feel if he knew the commander of the Kingsguard was sleeping with his mother while the heir was murdered? Aegon is angry with Criston for not protecting his family, and this whole incident is reminiscent of what happened on Driftmark with Aemond. Criston Cole was given the Night's Watch, and yet failed in his duty as a member of the Kingsguard to protect the royal family, and as a result, Aemond lost an eye. Aegon also points a finger at Alicent. She pushed him to spare Rhaenyra and offer her peace, and now since it seems that she's likely murdered his son, he's angry with her. This was the price of her mercy. Otto decides to bring up his plan for the death of Jaehaerys. Regardless of who actually killed him, he wants the people to think that it was Rhaenyra, to damage her reputation. He wants to paint her as a villain, a kinslayer, and a child murderer. Would you really want to be ruled by a woman who's capable of things like that? Aegon refuses this though, saying that he doesn't want his son's body paraded around like a dog, and I can't help but notice the similarities he has to his father Viserys in this moment, because he said a similar thing when it came to the deaths of his son Balon and his wife Aemma Arryn. After the death of his wife and son, his counselors immediately began talking about politics and matters of succession, while he barely had time to process the loss and grieve. He says,
"My wife and son are dead! I will not sit here and suffer crows that come to feast on their corpses!
I will not have my little son's body dragged through the street like a dead dog."
So there are definitely similarities to Aegon and his father. And history definitely seems to be repeating itself with Otto, who puts emotion aside for the sake of the greater good. What he says about using his great-grandson Jaehaerys as a political prop to gain support is good and a smart plan for the long game, but you can see how it definitely wears down on Aegon. He can't even grieve his child properly without plans being made. His emotions have to be kept in check for the sake of success. This has pretty much been the story of his entire life from childhood. I go into a lot of detail about this in a video I made last year during the events of Season 1 called Aegon, A Man Without Love, so feel free to go check that out if you feel so compelled. Aegon's wants and needs are constantly overlooked and pushed aside by his mother, father, and grandfather, so it's no wonder that he's been on the decline for years and on the road to implosion. Aegon doesn't want to be seen as weak, but Otto says that he is seen as weak, and that people want Rhaenyra to be queen. It's kind of reminiscent of Daemon and Viserys, how he calls Viserys weak and his council knows it, so they prey on him.
"You're weak, Viserys. And that council of leeches knows it. They all prey on you for their own ends."
But it does make me wonder, do the people actually think that Aegon is a weak king, or is this just Otto playing on his grandson's insecurities in order to make him more susceptible to his suggestions? Either way, Aegon is forced to go along with his plan, as are Alicent and Helaena. Alicent says that she doesn't want to be seen as a spectacle, like the one they're turning Jaehaerys into, and this is echoed by Helaena afterwards. We see her holding the blanket she was knitting for Jaehaerys in episode 1. She looks like a mess, and once again, I feel so sorry for her. She says she doesn't want to be closer to the common people. She doesn't know them. Helaena doesn't want this, but Alicent says that as representatives of the crown, they have a duty. Once again, another theme of the episode. Duty. It reminds me of Cregan Stark from episode 1. He says that duty is sacrifice. It eclipses all things, even blood, which becomes very obvious at the end of the episode. But for now, Helaena has to sacrifice her own feelings for the sake of duty. So does Aegon and even Alicent. Alicent tries to talk to her daughter about the night she came into her room with Criston Cole, but Helaena doesn't seem to care, saying that the blanket in her hands is for her boy. Mother and daughter go through the city to show off the dead body of Prince Jaehaerys, whose head has been sewn back on by the Silent Sisters, and the blanket made by Helaena has become his funeral shroud. The people curse Rhaenyra for this. They call her Rhaenyra the Cruel, like Maegor the Cruel, one of the worst Targaryen monarchs in history. In the books, Rhaenyra is actually called Maegor with teats. They call her the Defiler of the Innocent, and a kinslayer, ruining her image in the eyes of the small folk, the ones who once called her the realm's delight. Helaena is overwhelmed by all these people, though. In addition to being prophetic, she is also neurodivergent in the show. So all these people talking to her, throwing things, and later swarming and trying to touch her when the cart gets stuck are definitely too much for her to handle. She looks like she wants to just run away from it all. In conjunction with this, Larys confronts Blood, who wastes no time outing Daemon and Cheese at the prospect of being tortured. Last episode, Blood seemed so ready for action, willing to kill a maid for seeing him, willing to kill his own accomplice to take the money for himself, kick this poor helpless dog, and cut off a child's head in front of his own mother. Yet, now that he's been caught, he's scared of being hurt, of the pain he's caused coming back onto him. Larys says that he will not hurt Blood, but Aegon didn't make any promises. Aegon starts beating Blood, letting out his rage and grief on the man who killed his son. In the books, Blood does not have a quick death. After being caught for the death of Jaehaerys, he is tortured for 13 days before he's allowed to die. So it might be safe to say that what Aegon did is just the beginning. On Dragonstone, word reaches Rhaenyra about the death of Jaehaerys, and how the Greens are pinning the blame on her. Rhaenyra obviously had no part in this, and thinks it's a lie, for she wouldn't harm an innocent child, let alone her sisters, especially having recently lost two of her own, Luke and Visenya. One of the people on Rhaenyra's council suggests that maybe she made a decision in her grief over Lucerys. So already you see the seeds of possible division within Rhaenyra's own court. How many people will believe the rumors? How many will stay loyal? Rhaenys notices Daemon looking somewhat smug, or at least nonchalant about the death of his own nephew. Since the Greens are still related to the Blacks by blood, I know it can be easy to forget that with all the animosity between them. Rhaenys knows that Daemon is more than willing to go around Rhaenyra to do what he believes needs to be done. In the last season, though this has nothing to do with Rhaenyra, Rhaenys says this line about the Rogue Prince.
Daemon did what he thought best.
Daemon only ever does what is best for Daemon.
Though this comment was made out of grief for her own daughter, she does have a point. Daemon has a tendency to just do whatever as long as he gets the result he desires, whether it's lying about sleeping with his niece or threatening war to get the attention of his older brother. This is no different. Rhaenyra notices as well, and in the privacy of her own quarters, confronts Daemon over blood and cheese. Daemon says he told them to kill Aemon, and that he denies that he told them to kill Jaehaerys. He says it was a mistake, but Daemon doesn't seem too bothered by the death of a child as a result of his own orders. In fact, it really seems that Daemon merely views Jaehaerys as a casualty of war, and this is unsurprising. Daemon has done what he wanted regardless of who was affected by it, like Mysaria, who later appears in the episode. He said he was going to marry her and lied about her being pregnant with his child, putting her life and the lives of his Goldcloaks who followed him to Dragonstone at risk by threatening to go to war with his big brother. But this casualty may not be the one they come back from. Word is spreading that Rhaenyra is a kinslayer, one of the most heinous things to be branded as in Westeros outside of a kingslayer, like Jaime Lannister. She is seen as a child killer. Daemon has really compromised them in their political position, and seems more bothered that Rhaenyra isn't actually accepting his actions than the death of an innocent. Perhaps it's because he doesn't see the Greens as family, as his brother's children, that he no longer cares. Daemon says he said no to killing Jaehaerys, but Rhaenyra doesn't believe him, and neither do I. During the scene when she's asked what they should do if they can't find Aemond, Daemon just looks at them and the scene cuts away. Later on, Blood said that Daemon said a son for a son, which implied that he wanted someone to die. Even if he didn't say to kill Jaehaerys explicitly, he left things open-ended. The truth is, even if he didn't order the death of Jaehaerys, he wanted something to happen, to land a blow against the Greens. And as a result of his actions, Rhaenyra has lost trust in him. She says that she never trusted Daemon actually, at least not wholly, and that as a child she took Daemon as a challenge. But now that she's grown, things are different. Daemon goes on a rant about how he's doing everything for Rhaenyra, and she asks if Daemon truly accepts her as his queen, or is he still clinging to his inheritance. Daemon goes on another rant saying that Viserys was a coward, that he was the stronger son, a leader, and that Viserys was afraid to be in his shadow. He calls Rhaenyra's rise to power into question. Did he really truly want her to be queen, or was Viserys just stopping Daemon from being king? Both are true, but Daemon's reasoning is flawed. Initially, Rhaenyra was named heir to keep Daemon out of power, but not because Viserys feared him, but because he could not be trusted. Viserys went through leaps and bounds to keep Daemon around, even when people like Otto told Viserys to do away with him. Even after years apart, in an open rebellion, Viserys always looked out for his little brother. In truth, it was Daemon who burned the bridges his big brother built for him. But instead of admitting his own faults and taking responsibility, Daemon flaunts his ego to hide the bruises beneath. He says Rhaenyra is too afraid to spill blood in order to achieve greatness. And I think this reaffirms my statement about Daemon seeing Jaehaerys as just another casualty of war. Once again, he calls it a mistake, and Rhaenyra says he's pathetic. So he leaves, takes his dragon Caraxes, and flies away, most likely to Harrenhal. Rhaenys says later on in the episode that maybe if he can take Harrenhal, perhaps Rhaenyra will forgive him for what he's done. Kinda like when Daemon claimed the Stepstones to get back in Viserys' good graces. Back in King's Landing, we see Aegon and Helaena after their son's funeral. Aegon hesitates when he's around her for a moment before just walking away. Once again, we see the disconnect between husband and wife, brother and sister. Aegon never really knew how to embrace Helaena as children, so it's sad. The death of their son should be bringing them together, but instead they drift apart, perhaps even further than they were before. Criston Cole sees the aftermath of Jaehaerys' death as they take down his bed. He looks guilty. Perhaps if he was on duty, he could have stopped this from happening. But beyond Criston Cole, we saw so many soldiers and household guards around the castle. Even if Criston is Kingsguard and the Lord Commander of it, why were none of them stationed by the Queen and her children? In the books, there actually was a guard present during Blood and Cheese, but he was killed. So Helaena being unprotected in the show seems like an oversight. Or perhaps something more nefarious was at play. Maybe the guards weren't stationed by her for a reason. Maybe someone knew this was going to happen and allowed it to. We get a scene of Rhaenyra playing with her sons Aegon the Younger and Viserys. We go back to King's Landing, and Criston Cole stands guard outside of Alicent's door. She asks him if he's told anyone about them, to which he says no. Criston in this moment seems to be having an internal struggle between his desires and his duty, as Criston standing guard is intercut with Alicent undressing. Perhaps he's fighting himself not to go in the room. But after this, Criston then begins projecting his own insecurities and failings as a Kingsguard onto Auric Cargyle. He says that the white cloak is a symbol of their purity and fidelity, and it's an insult that his is dirty. But it's ironic. Though Auric has physically sullied his white cloak, he's still a more honorable man than Criston will ever be. He hasn't broken his vows in the same way that Criston has. Unlike Criston, he can actually say that he was doing his duty, guarding the king. And like Daemon did to his brother Eric in the last episode, Criston accuses Auric of potentially being a traitor, so he pressures him into going to Dragonstone to kill Rhaenyra. As this happens, the scene is a bit tense, as they don't know if Rhaenyra has informants in the castle. On Dragonstone, Jace and Baela talk about their dads. Baela says that sometimes she thinks that she hates Daemon, which is unsurprising given his track record, and Baela also implies that during this conversation, she knows that Harwin Strong was the true father of Jaehaerys. We then see Aemond in a brothel for a brief moment. We see him be vulnerable both mentally and physically as he is completely naked. He says he regrets what happened with Luke and that he lost his temper. He reveals the animosity he had for being bullied for years by his brother and nephews. The woman he's with says that when princes lose their temper, people like her, the small folk, suffer. You see Aemond's eye quiver during this. Perhaps he feels guilty about Jaehaerys. Because he killed Luke, the assassins came after him, and now his nephew is dead. We see Hugh, the blacksmith from last episode, with his wife and daughter. His wife was actually at the funeral procession for Prince Jaehaerys. Times are hard for the people of King's Landing because of the blockade the Velaryons have up. So, this family is struggling, but Hugh says that the king has promised the Smiths some relief with the deal he made to give them money before Scorpion production up front. But, with the death of his own son, will King Aegon keep his word? We go back to Driftmark and see Alan from the last episode with his older brother, Adam of Hull. The two catch up and talk about the potential opportunity of working with Corlys at sea. Adam seems excited for the adventure, but Alan is distant. During this conversation, Adam says that Corlys owes them, once again feeding into the fact that there is history between the brothers and the Sea Snake, that I'm sure we'll learn more about in the future. Later, Mysaria meets Rhaenyra. These two have actually met years ago when she was a kid and went to Dragonstone to get her brother's egg back from Daemon. Rhaenyra wants information from her. Her connection to Daemon, the part she played in the death of Jaehaerys. Mysaria relates to Rhaenyra during this conversation unintentionally. Like Rhaenyra, Mysaria has also had to struggle, from being a slave to being seen as less than dirt by men in positions of authority. Used by people like Daemon and Otto. She realizes that people like them will never accept her. Kinda like Rhaenyra has to fight so hard to be recognized as a woman monarch. Rhaenyra will later let Mysaria go instead of keeping her as a prisoner. We see a scene of Adam of Hull on the beach digging through the sand, and in the distance we see a dragon flying overhead. This dragon is likely Sea Smoke. After Laenor disappeared, he has no one to ride him. Perhaps he's looking for his old friend. Back in King's Landing, a mass execution has occurred after Blood confessed to working with a rat catcher, but with no real details on who the guy was, Aegon decided to have them all killed. In the books, it's never clarified if Cheese was killed, but as we see in the show, he indeed was. But it doesn't take away from the brutality of it all. So many innocents dead for the price of one man, and still Aegon himself is none the wiser about who actually killed his son. For all he knows, the culprit could have actually gotten away, and he's just satisfied having killed a bunch of innocent men for no reason. Otto storms in and calls Aegon a fool and a failure as a king. He killed the sons of the people who just mourned his. In one move, all the sympathy they gained from the common folk is just gone. But even though Otto is right during this entire conversation, what Aegon did was incredibly rash and stupid. I can't side with Otto during this conversation. He calls Aegon more than a fool, but what does that make him for putting him on the throne? A man who has expressed since childhood that he never wanted the throne, yet his mother and grandfather forced it on him without actually preparing him for it. This is Otto's fault too. All this death and destruction. Aegon and Criston Cole aren't the only incompetent men in this room. Like Aegon during this conversation, he fails to see his own shortcomings. Aegon was neglected by his father, verbally and physically abused by his mother, moved around and manipulated by her and his grandfather. He's a monster of their own creation. They played a hand in all these deaths just as much as he did. Especially the hand. Well, former hand, since Aegon strips Otto of his position and gives it to Criston Cole, saying that his new hand will be a steel fist. Criston Cole just seems to fail upwards in this society. Next thing you know, he's gonna be the one sitting on the Iron Throne, not Aegon or his brothers. After being dismissed, Alicent and Otto have a conversation. It's here that we finally get a name drop for Daemon Targaryen, the fourth and final child of Alicent and Viserys. Otto says that Daemon might be of some use to them in the days to come. Alicent also tells Otto during this conversation to go to Highgarden and get the Tyrells for support since their banners are wavering. We go back to Dragonstone. After Mysaria is let free and makes her way to his ship, she sees Auric Cargyle on his way to Rhaenyra. When he finally manages to get to her, he's confronted by his brother, Eric. The two fight and profess their love for one another, though they fight to the death. It's unclear who actually won between the two of them, because Eric, who seemed to be protecting Rhaenyra, got a wound on his leg that his brother later dug into and caused him to back away and go for his sword when he was choking him out. The brother with the leg wound was killed by the other. Eric from Team Black seemed to be the one who died. But the last brother standing calls Rhaenyra Your Grace. Why would he say that if he serves Aegon? Maybe this one is Eric? Or maybe this one is Auric, but in his final moments after killing his brother, his mind has changed. Either way, whoever actually won the fight, the grief over his brother's death causes him to take his own life. In the books, the accounts of the brothers' deaths vary. Some say that the two actually killed each other. Some say that Eric actually won the fight and cut off his brother's arm, but suffered a stomach wound and died later on. Either way, it's still a tragic tale. They came into the world together, and now they leave it together as well. As the episode ends, we see Alicent walk in on a grieving Aegon, but instead of comforting her oldest son, she just leaves. Which is interesting, because in the last episode she said she wanted her sons to be closer to her, to heed her advice. What better way to make herself more valuable to her son than to comfort him during his time of need after the death of his child? But instead of doing this, she goes to Criston Cole and takes her frustrations out on him. It seems like to me that for Alicent, sex is her form of emotional expression, the best way to let out her darker emotions. Alicent from a young age never had real freedom or agency, not even over her own body and feelings, so what better way to express herself than this forbidden relationship? Once again, Alicent neglects her duties, not simply as a queen, but as a mother. She lets her own son grieve alone and doesn't even try to comfort him. It's a very stark contrast to what Rhaenyra did in episode 1 when it came to the death of Lucerys and her older son Jace. So I wonder, what will become of their relationship moving forward? What will happen if Aegon finds out about her relationship with Criston Cole? We'll have to see. All in all, this was a very good episode, and it laid a lot of seeds for the future, and I will be covering more each week as the episodes are released to us. For now, though, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me what you thought down below, and I will see you all next time.